Hey everybody, this is Will Doggett, founder from Studio to Stage. I work a lot with bands that use backing tracks on stage. And I have the privilege of working with a lot of pros that are out on the road, traveling, doing giant gigs, giant budget with major artists. But then I also have students that are just getting started. And there's really two things that I see pretty consistently with the pros when they go to build a playback rig, or they go to build a keyboard rig, or really they just think about the gear they need on stage that I see a lot of the beginners miss. And so I kind of think of them as secrets that the gatekeepers try to keep away from the rest of us. But I want to share those secrets with you guys today. So the first is this idea of division of labor. And the best way to think about this is, let's talk about in-ears. So your band wants to use tracks. You've got to have a click track and you've got to have in-ears. And what most of us start to think is we go, okay, I need a computer that can run tracks. Maybe we're doing some key stuff. So I need a computer that's powerful enough to run tracks and run keys. But then that Will guy said, we've got to use in-ears to be able to do this. So I need a computer that's powerful enough to run tracks, to run keys, to run in-ears. Then I've got to get an interface to get all of my inputs for everything on stage and to send outputs from my interface. It just starts to get really confusing, right? But the key concept here, let's say if we're talking about in-ears, is if we're thinking about division of labor, instead of one thing that's going to do all of that, instead of one piece of gear that needs to run our keys, to run our tracks, to buy one computer that's powerful enough to run in-ears, the pros think about division of labor. A really practical example is they go, okay, I'm going to buy an audio console, like this Behringer digital console here. I'm going to plug all my inputs into that. I'm going to allow it to create in-ear mixes for my band, and we can have a perfect in-ear mix for everything else. And then we're going to rely on an interface like the Play Audio 1U or some other audio interface to run outputs from our tracks. We're going to separate those things, right? And that's a really powerful concept because instead of, again, buying one really powerful computer, we can say, okay, I'm going to buy a computer that's going to be just focused on tracks. I'm going to buy a computer that's going to just be focused on keys. I'm going to be able to optimize both of those as opposed to trying to fit everything into one box. It all comes down to kind of managing two things, simplicity and stability, right? We can have a rig that's really, really stable, but maybe it's really, really complex because we have a computer for every single thing and it just starts to get a little crazy. Or you have a setup that's really, really simple. It's one computer for everything, but it's not very stable. So you want to try to find kind of that sweet spot. Honestly, the best piece of advice I can give you is contact your Sweetwater sales engineer and say, listen, here's what I want to do. I'm trying to run tracks, keys, in-ears. What do you suggest? And they're not just going to try to sell you more gear. They're going to say, this is the piece of gear you need to use to be stable and have a simple setup as well. So our first kind of secret that the pros implement is division of labor. They have a specific thing for a specific task. They don't try to have that one thing do everything for them. The other concept is really, really powerful as well, is redundancy. Now, we're shooting a lot of content here today at Sweetwater, and one of the videos I did before was talking about how hope is not a good backup plan. The pros don't roll into a gig and hope that it works. Fingers crossed, we're going to stand on one foot. We're going to make sure that everything works. No, they're paid to make sure and ensure with 100% certainty that things work. And the way they do that is redundancy. A perfect example here, I've got the Play Audio 1U, which is a redundant audio interface. It's basically two audio interfaces in one. I've got two completely identical sessions in my DAW. I've got two completely different computers. That's a redundant setup. And the reason I do that is if my first computer goes down, if my DAW were to crash, if someone were to trip over the cable, guess what happens? My second computer keeps going. And what you'll see in a lot of pros rigs, like my good friend Willie Linton, he's a student. You can check out the walkthrough video that Sweetwater did with him of his rig with Post Malone. He has redundancy for tracks. He has redundancy for keys. He has redundancy for auto tune, all sorts of different redundancies because hope is not a good backup plan. So when you're thinking about your rig, again, redundancy doesn't necessarily mean more gear. It just means having a backup plan that's something other than hope. Maybe it's not buying an additional audio interface. Maybe it's not buying an additional computer, but even just making a plan with the artist that you're working with that says, hey, if this were to go down, we've got enough to just kind of make it happen. One thing I see a lot of pros do is if they're creating a virtual keys rig, instead of just relying on their computer for everything, they'll buy a keyboard that has some built-in sounds in it. So if their computer were to crash, they can just pull up those individual sounds and make that work. I have a student, Steve, who's out on the road currently right now touring. Amazing, amazing setup, using a lot of virtual keys things. And when he said, hey, Will, how's this gonna work? How can we make it happen? I said, well, Steve, one thing to consider is having a additional computer. As we talked about it, we felt like that's just a little too complex for his rig. So instead, he's got a keyboard that has built-in sounds. He's already made a plan. If that computer were to go down, he's got those 4 sounds ready to go. So when you're looking to design the perfect live playback rig, keyboard rig, remember to keep these 2 things in mind: division of labor, specific things for specific tasks, and then also remember to account for redundancy. Hope is not a good backup plan. Again, the best thing I can encourage you to do is to reach out to your Sweetwater sales engineer, let them know what you're hoping to do. They're gonna say, here's the best gear for you, here's how to balance simplicity and stability, and you're gonna find a rig that you can trust with 100% certainty when you step on stage. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.